Carol, diz aí pro John. Ok. Please. Com a voz do além. 1, 2, 3. Não, tu é. 1, 2, 3. Uau. Carol, diz aí pro John. Tem muito eco. Nós queremos que as nossas vozes ecoem, mas não desta maneira. Vai. Não, estão lá na Rua Rocha. Na Rua Rocha, lá na GV. É. Rock Street. Deixa eu dar uma aqui.
E aí, o que você andou aprontando? Na eleição você vai comprar com alguém? É mesmo? Alô? Aqui? Nossa! Só fazendo aquele... Vai fazer o quê?
Eu tô engatilhado em 3 estados e tô nas ilhas e gente fazer uma presidencial.
O Chico não tá mais com
Check
você,
1, 2. Check 1, 2.
We're good, John.
O Aécio, eu não entendi o que ele... o Aécio, eu acho que a impressão que me dá é que ele não gosta de ser contrariado, né?
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Porque contratou o Census. O Census, ele é famoso por só dizer o que você paga para ele dizer.
A gente trabalhou no ano passado inteiro. Diferente do pessoal. Pode ser que eles estejam errados, que eles estejam certos, que a gente esteja assim.
Pode ser. Mas eles achavam que as pesquisas nossas estavam erradas também. Mas você está concentrado ainda em fazer o microtargeting? Aí avançou já o mapeamento, conseguiu mais dados?
Consegui, agora eu tenho um software que capta informação offline e online. Em vez de ficar só captando informação pública, para ter interação com o eleitor, seja plataforma, seja e-mail, se volta e realimenta o software. A gente não pode dar assim para
Tamanho total base já.
toda pesquisa que a gente faz, por exemplo, volta os dados, banco de dados, vai uma rua, volta os dados. Está no Brasil inteiro mais ou menos 114 milhões de registros. A gente tem informação de eleitor.
114? Quase o eleitorado inteiro.
Tem mais uns 55 milhões ainda para.
Tem redundância, porque são 140, 135.
No TSS ficam 152.
Até se a conta um monte de morto. Né? Você viu a diferença que deu em Alagoas?
Please talk into your microphone so we can hear your sound. This is
Eu quero saber
AV
quando que os
talking to Polycom.
vão parar de escrever que a abstenção é repúdio à democracia.
Check 1, 2.
Daí tem um golpe em seguida porque a eleição não foi legítima. Né?
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Bacana. 2 vezes aí, precisa mostrar.
Alô? Ah, agora não tem mais eco. Carol, tell Vilhena to show up where expected. Please. Fala mais um pouquinho, por favor, pra gente. Lá em São Paulo. Está nos ouvindo ou não? Um, dois, três, teste. Michael, você consegue falar com eles daí, da sala de controle? É? Não, então... Um de vocês, diz para ele produzir o Oscar Vilhena na sala, por favor. Que se materialize o professor Oscar Vilhena. Que apareça. O Dean. Mr. Dean. Pena que nós somos a General Inverno nos atropelou. Okay, looks like there's movement. Where is the people? My goodness. Amanhã eu passo motor 9 e a gente anda ali pro executivo. Eu já mandei a...
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Can you hear us? Check 1, 2.
É daí da sala que estão falando?
É uma terceira entidade agora.
You still hear us?
Test.
Check 1, 2.
Hello?
Check 1, 2.
More?
Então vamos falar. 1, 2, 3. Atenção, GV. Tudo em ordem aí? Não? Falemos, please. Não, eu que preciso do Vilhena lá. É a segunda vez. A primeira vez também nós tivemos problemas de comunicação. Mas essa vez não tem audiência lá, outra vez tinha audiência lá. Ok. Ah, tinha um... tem
Check
sempre
1, 2. Can you hear some Polycom?
Tem sempre tem um botãozinho que alguém não apertou ou que apertou demais.
Em geral é aquela pecinha que fica na frente do teclado, né?
É.
Tem um dedo.
Bueno. Guys, we need to get going. Because está ficando abusive.
Posso roubar esse computador aqui pra cá?
Hein?
Tá alguém aqui?
Não, puxa. Aham. Não, mas é engraçado, porque ele confirmou, ué. Eu não quero começar, é meio chato começar sem ele. Cadê o professor Vilhena? Não aparece ali na sala.
Porque eles não estão conseguindo fazer com conferência, então a gente vai ver a imagem mais rápido do telefone.
Que telefone?
Eu pedi pra ele chamar os caras.
Que telefone?
Eles vão fazer isso.
Ah. Esses são os técnicos. Você sabe que nos Estados Unidos e no Brasil é tudo igualzinho. Ninguém sabe chongas. Ah, tá aqui o telefone. That's the telephone. Não, deixa eu ficar quieto. Não ficar quieto, falar nada.
Pode piorar. Qualquer coisa que você diga pra você gostar pra você.
Tudo foi testado. Foi tudo testado antes. Viu, Maurício? Foi tudo testado antes, viu? Você conhece a lei de Murphy? Lá em Harvard eles estudam essa lei, não? Hein? The Murphy's Law. Tem.
Eu não sei.
Tá faltando.
Podia ser uma Brasil,
Porque tá em podendo dar errado, dará.
Brasil é a prova.
Sorry, apologies. Mas as duas vezes o problema foi aquilo, foi lá. No Be Proud. Ah, isso você, quando terminar aqui, você saberá sem a menor sombra de dúvida. Quer saber também o resultado da Copa do Mundo? A gente divulga. Né? Isso aí eu sei. Isso aí eu sei com certeza qual é o resultado. Eu não sei como é que a gente vai chegar lá. Mas...
Uruguai, óbvio.
Não, para com isso. Eu nasci em 1950. Não faça isso. Não vai fazer isso comigo duas vezes, não. Pelo amor de Deus. Eu acho que se o Uruguai ganhar essa Copa, eu acho que a anexação é a única. Ou é político, né?
Exatamente.
Uai, não. Porque aí a gente passa para quantas Copas? Eles têm duas, né? Eles teriam três, passa para 9.
Fora os títulos olímpicos.
Passamos
a gente
de
não tem.
6 para 9. Não, nós temos quantas?
Se o
5.
Nobel vale a pena. O Nobel a gente tá em
Nós
falta.
temos 5. Eles têm duas, ganham.
E a eleição vai depender.
Ah, certamente.
Sem contar que a maconha passa a ser legalizada também.
Ah, e legaliza-se a maconha, olha aí.
Excelente ideia.
Excelente
Melhor
ideia.
que anexar Portugal.
Melhor que anexar Portugal. E o Fernando Henrique fica toda a campanha, né?
Sim, só no Uruguai.
Olha, mas isso dá um belo artigo, hein?
Olha, se faltar assunto na próxima coluna, já sei que
Às vezes você já sabe o que vai escrever. That's nice. Well, we are waiting for the technology to materialize. English. English. Maurício, senta aqui assim, você fica ali, ó. Mas olha, mas o doutor Vilhena, ele é um artista, ele só aparece.
Tá esperando as cortinas abrirem.
Alô, alô. Não, mas isso é uma coisa. Eles checaram isso tudo certinho. Será que eu fico calmo ou eu tenho um chilique ali?
Na minha experiência, o chilique...
É melhor não, né? Eu vou dilmar o ambiente.
Os rapazes estavam trocando o microfone.
Eu tô te ocupando muito tempo.
Não, tudo bem, na verdade já passou do meu horário, acho que o Gelson tá sumindo.
Ah, então tá.
Não, sem problemas.
Não, tá. Obrigada.
Por nada.
Também eu nem sei conta de perguntar antes.
Relaxa.
Desculpa.
Tudo bem, acontece.
Tá bom. Obrigada.
Por nada.
Alô? Não. Vocês conseguem escutar a gente? Não.
Well, we gotta go. Isso é muito chato. Isso aqui é... Isso aqui é a segunda vez que acontece isso, viu? Então, quando me disseram que as coisas não funcionam no Brasil, então também não fiquem muito emocionados, não, porque We don't have a monopoly on incompetence. Parece lá de vez em quando você começa a conversar com as pessoas, lá parece que só tem lá, né? Isso aqui no Brasil, segunda vez que acontece, inclusive com o
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Can you hear us?
Yes, that's okay.
Okay, please, could you tell Professor Vilhena to materialize in São Paulo? No, please tell Oscar Vilhena to join us, please. We will start this immediately.
Taking you seriously.
We want to leave that there in case.
Okay,
He's not taking seriously.
Yes, that's okay.
okay. Carol, where is the...
Acho que eu já me vi já.
Escuta, o professor Oscar Vilhena está chegando aí, não? We are good to go? Guys, it's past 3 o'clock. We have to start. It's not Brazil. Opa, there is movement. Oh my goodness. Não tem ninguém no charge. Rua Rocha. Rua Rocha. Esse trânsito aí é da Rua Rocha. Sim?
Lá tava nevando ontem, imagina.
Não, olha, let's... Michael, see what's... It's, you know... This is almost abusing people already. So we have to do.
Caraca, essa é a primeira vez que dá tanto problema, cara. Nossa.
Olha, nós... Pessoal em São Paulo, vocês nos ouvem? Aparentemente não.
Perfeito hoje de manhã, cara.
Não, aparentemente ouve, mas não presta atenção.
O Lucas chegou lá? Lucas chegou, tá lá.
Tem uma chave, um cadeado que está aberto, Hã?
O rádio lá, só que ele não tá falando, não. Mas eu cheguei a procurar, né?
E pô,
Não, tô aqui na casa dele. Você subir, você sabe a pessoa. Vamos deixar o
aparentemente estamos ouvindo. 1, 2, 3.
Qual que é aquele 27? É o 27. Ah, tá. Posso ficar com ele.
Yeah, we can hear them.
Geralmente fico com ele é o Carlão. Você ligou de manhã, eu falei, caraca.
Yes.
Tem que reveza, eu fui com o secretário, eu fico com o 27 de manhã.
Hã? Alô, alô, vocês nos ouvem aí em São Paulo? Alô? Alô, alô?
Tristeza lá no auditório já. Um monte de gente lotado. Quando fala. Todo mundo nervoso, tá ligado? Só fico olhando pra você.
One, two, three. Nós vamos perder. Ah, ele fechou lá o som. Bom, eu vou fazer um último check. Nós vamos começar aqui mesmo, sem esse cara.
Fica até quando aquilo?
Amanhã.
Aquele cara ali da esquerda, que vem da direita?
Chegou
Não sei.
um pouquinho antes da neve. Posso ser acusado de ser o responsável por trazer a comida.
Não. Vendo então. Foi bom, pelo menos eu experimentei essa coisa da neve, enfim. Falar que tive essa experiência. Quem gosta é criançada, toda vez interrompe a aula. Tem um limite de reposição de aula de 5 aulas. Obrigado, linda.
Quer o café também?
Obrigado.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear us in Polycom?
Eu ponho aula até 5 dias. Aí quando teve a sexta nevasca, liberaram. Esquece, não escola, me avisaram antes. Foi um horror, foi um caos. Nossa, todo mundo reclamou, quase derrubaram o governador. Aí a partir disso ele toda vez está segurando. Então,
Check 1, 2. Can you hear us in Polycom?
9 dias que eles perderam aula. 9 dias sem aula. Eles adoram.
Pelo amor de Deus. And we are going to try to fix the technical problem while we talk here. Good afternoon. I'm Paulo Sotero, director of the Brazil Institute here at the Wilson Center. On behalf of our institute, I would like to welcome you all this afternoon to a discussion on the outlook of the October elections in Brazil. This, as you know, was scheduled for yesterday, but the snow forced us to postpone it to today, and we lost part of our audience. I think, is this being webcast, John? Yes. Yeah, so there are other people watching us because this is being webcast right now, live. I have the pleasure to introduce you to start this discussion that is the first of a series of events we are going to have this year surrounding the elections. José Roberto de Toledo, journalist and expert in public opinion at O Estado de S.Paulo, Brazilian Daily. Fernando Guarnieri, political science researcher at the University of São Paulo, visiting scholar at the University of Maryland right now. We hope to have, no, he's there, Oscar Vilhena, Dean of the Getulio Vargas Law School, who will be joining us long distance as soon as we get the sound fixed. And the idea here is to discuss the outlook of the elections and based on a few information that was in that invitation, basically that right now, end of March 2014, it looks like President Dilma Rousseff is very well positioned to be re-elected in the first round of the presidential elections, first round scheduled for October 5th, as Brazil embarks on the 7th consecutive general election campaign since the reinstatement of democracy in 1985. Polls indicating she is the favorite among three likely major candidates, come, however, with an important caveat, which is that 2/3 of the voters in the same polls say that they feel anxious about the future and want change. So how come that in an electorate that says it wants change is overwhelmingly or considerably headed or indicating they don't want change? And that's the contradiction. It looks like the candidates that figure this out will have an advantage in this campaign. As you know, from media reports, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who is one of the most astute and successful politicians in Brazil's history, has expressed some anxiety about this favoritism of his candidate and his political creature, President Dilma Rousseff, and especially worries about the possibility of the popular governor of the state of Pernambuco, Eduardo Campos, a former ally of the Workers' Party-led coalition, emerging as a challenger to President Rousseff in the second round. A number of factors could indeed alter the electoral outlook in the months ahead, and that's why what we wanted to hear from our speakers tonight, this afternoon. Let me tell you who they are. José Roberto de Toledo, journalist, a pollster, a public opinion expert. He's a columnist at the Estado de S.Paulo, a creator of Estadão Dados, which is Estadão Data, which aims at capturing and processing information using statistic technique, algorithms, and visual representations, allowing the reader to draw their own analysis. Very important, Toledo is also founder and president of the Brazilian Association of Investigative Journalism, which is a very active institution, and as you know, I am a journalist, and in my book, a very important institution. And he also pioneered data journalism in Brazil, or computer-assisted reporting. And I believe in that. He has a great partner in Rosenthal Calmon Alves, from a dear friend from the University of Austin. This is a little bit of a journalist mafia thing. You know, we all work together once. Fernando Guarnieri is, as I said, political scientist. He earned a PhD in political science from the University of São Paulo. He's a researcher at the Center for Metropolitan Studies, which is held at SEBRAP. SEBRAP, for those who are not aware, is a very important think tank in Brazil, one of the first think tanks in Brazil, formed by... Conversation. We are listening to you guys, but precisely when we don't want to. So, okay. No, just SEBRAP is a think tank that was created in 1969-70 with seed money from Ford Foundation. Was created by a group of professors that were banned from teaching at the University of São Paulo in, I know the date because one of the professors, or my professor, was, I think, 19 of April of 69. And leading that group was Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who later became president of Brazil. So it's very always good to have someone from SEBRAP with us. As I mentioned, Fernando is currently a visiting scholar at the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland. And he specializes in the study of origin and evolution of Brazilian political parties, of which we have many. 21 in Congress, 29 in total? 32.
The way to become 34.
34. It's a big country. You know, we need a lot of parties. We cannot just do 2 or 3. Oscar Vilhena, who you see on the screen here, is a dear friend, and he is the dean of the law school at the Getulio Vargas Foundation in São Paulo. He is the founder and served as co-director of Conectas Human Rights, taught constitutional law and human rights at the School of Law Getulio Vargas Foundation at the Catholic University of São Paulo, served as a state attorney and executive secretary of the United Nations Latin American Institute in Brazil. He was a legal advisor for a very important center for the studies of violence at the University of São Paulo and executive secretary of the Teotônio Vilela Commission for Human Rights. He has a law degree from the Catholic University of São Paulo, an LLM from Columbia University, a PhD and MA and PhDs from the University of São Paulo. Well, having said that, I will invite Toledo, José Roberto Toledo, to start us off by giving us a sort of an overview of what is this election, the upcoming election, what can we say about the election that is safe, and what that is kind of stable, that will remain for this next few months, and what may change. And then we'll hear from Fernando, and then I will invite also Oscar Vilhena to talk. I will make a very brief presentation on the protests and the impact that there may or may not have on elections. Toledo.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for inviting me here. Thank you very much for to be here with us, and I would like to apologize in advance because I have a very poor English and sometimes creative. I tend to make up some words, so if please correct me when I'm wrong. Well, I was thinking about the things that are common between Brazil and the US, considering the election process. And there are many coincidences. Well, we have 4 years presidential mandates with the possibility of one re-election. The main drive in the election is if people want to change or want to continue with the present government. It's also the economy is stupid. And there are 3 types of voters. As in the US, you have Democrats and independents and Republicans. In Brazil, you have pro-PT, or in favor of the Workers' Party. That's kind of 25%, maybe sometimes 30%, depends on the year. You have the anti-PT, the anti-Workers' Party electorate, the voters, who are also kind of 25 to 30%. And you have more or less 50% of independent, pragmatic electors, or voters. And also, the agenda of this campaign, I think the hot topics will be some kind of the same. Public health, I think it's an issue here. It's also a big issue in Brazil. Energy policy, in Brazil, gasoline prices and the possible shortage of electricity. And of course, the blaming each other game. Well, if those are the points in common, the difference will be that Brazil has 32 political parties with 21 in Congress. Our presidential candidates need to have 50% plus 1 vote to win in the first round, or you have a runoff. And the candidates don't pay for their time in TV or radio. They have almost 2 hours to divide among themselves to be used in the 40 days previous to the election. And the distribution of this time is proportional to the number of congressmen each coalition has in their side. So, putting this, what is the scenario that we have for this election in Brazil? As Paulo already said, 2 out of 3 Brazilian voters want to change, want to see things changing in Brazilian government, federal government. But at the same time, 1/3 of those also say they will vote for Dilma Rousseff. So what's the catch? Well, the problem is, or the question is, that Dilma still has a very good evaluation. The public opinion is, the majority of public opinion is in her favor. She has something between 55 to 60%, depending on the survey you see. But it's still a very high popularity rate. And this campaign will be very different from the past ones because it will be shorter. As you know, Brazil will be the place where the World Soccer Cup will take place this year. It will begin officially in June, but in Brazil it will begin in May. The idea of the World Cup will start really before the competition, when all the teams start to arrive, and everybody will just look at this until the end of the competition, which will be in middle July, and probably 1 week or 2 weeks, depending on the hangover. So we can expect that the real campaign, the electoral campaign, will begin in August. So we'll have August and September, and the election is on the beginning of October. This is very good news for Dilma Rousseff because, as also Sotero has told you, Dilma is leading all the surveys or all the polls. She has something like 43, 45% of the intentions. If you exclude from this the blank votes and the spoil votes, it's almost 50% plus 1 vote. She theoretically could be elected in the first round. I don't believe it because never a Workers' Party candidate has been elected in the first round. Neither Lula, neither she. And today's scenario that we are seeing in the polls are not exactly the same scenario that we will see when the campaign starts, because there will be lots of what we call, I don't think it's politically correct to say it here.
So good.
Let's say small candidates, very small, nano candidates.
Nanicos, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, exactly.
Nano candidates.
We call it nanicos. Well, but some of them are not so nano candidates as this. The last Datafolha survey showed, for example, that a guy whose name doesn't matter, but starts with the word pastor, which means preacher, had 3% just because of this word, preacher. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what comes after the preacher. And so he will still vote from Dilma and also from other opposition candidates. So this distribution is going to change a little bit because we don't know exactly who will be the candidates. Some say, and I think my colleagues will be more competent to say about it, that even Joaquim Barbosa could be a candidate. I don't particularly don't think he will, but he's acting as a candidate already. Well, this can change a little bit the scenario, but there are other things that could interfere in this clear lead that Dilma has already. First of all, the World Cup. I really don't believe that the outcome of the competition will have any kind of influence in the electoral results, because we've already have won or lost World Soccer Cups, and it didn't play any role in the outcome of the election. But certainly, the organization of the World Cup is going to play a role, an important role. If it comes to be a completely disaster, a nightmare of logistics and things like that, and violence, and this projects a very bad image of Brazil, certainly it will compromise Dilma's chance to win. But also, it's important to notice that the country is already divided concerning this matter. There are more or less 6% of Brazilians that are in favor of the World Cup in Brazil, and roughly 40%, 44% against it, especially because of the expenditures that the government has had to build arenas that won't serve for nothing after the World Cup is ended. There's one in Manaus, in the north of the country, that there's no really soccer in Manaus, so they are thinking about to become a presidium, or as we call to put in inmates. Yeah, it would be a solution, yeah, if you can. Well, but in fact, the main problem is if it is going to be a success or not, and the people are divided. So those who are in favor of the government tend to be in favor of the World Cup also, and the same to the other side. Who are against the World Cup is already against the government. So it really doesn't change anything, because people are already in their sides. The second thing, but in the margins, something could come up if the World Cup becomes a disaster. The second thing is the possibility for Brazil to experience shortages in electricity supply. We are in a very dry season, the driest season in many, many years, and some of the reservoirs of hydroelectric plants are very low. The system is operating in its limits because as the boom, the consumer boom, people bought a lot of air conditioning and things like that, so they are spending more money in electricity, and the government has had a difficult policy in this matter. So it's a possibility, it's not a probability yet, but it is a possibility, and as we've experienced in Fernando Henrique's second term, this kind of shortage is a political problem. It was terrible for him, for example. But at the same time, if we have this shortage, probably we're going to have a shortage of water before. And because also the reservoirs are very low. So cities like São Paulo, the main city in the country, is facing a shortage in water supply just in July, just before the beginning of the election and the propaganda in TV. And this will impact directly the election in the São Paulo government, who has been governed by the opposition, the federal opposition, for the last 20 years. So if Dilma loses from one side because of the drought, because of the dry weather, she could profit in the other, and vice versa. So it's not so clear how this will affect the election. And finally, we have the economy and the protests. And those things are, I think, very, very well connected. There's no really good explanation for why we have seen what we have seen in last year, massive protests. And there are many possible explanations, but I think if the economy has some kind of difficulty, but it must be a very grave difficulty, a very difficult, a very big problem. Maybe this could be the beginning of a new wave of protests. But for now, what we've seen this year is not very encouraging for the protesters. The last two protests that have already happened in São Paulo this year against the World Cup had twice the policemen as the protesters. And the policemen also arrested 100, so there was nobody else. So the scenario shows a situation where Dilma is the favorite, of course, and she has many advantages against her opponents. Let's recapitulate the short period of campaign, the fact that she's much well known, that she still have a high popularity rate, and finally the fact that in Brazil she will have more time for propaganda purposes during the TV campaign than she and Lula had in the 3 previous campaigns. The advantage that she has this year is much bigger than she already had in the past elections. If PMDB, the biggest party in the country, remains in her coalition, which now it's debatable. I don't really think they will abandon the boat because they depend on the money. But it's a possibility, and if they change boats, this could have a really big impact.
Okay, thank you very much, Toledo, for this. And well, that ties in very well with Fernando Guarnieri's area of expertise. And I would ask you to talk about this, because it looks like essentially the election in Brazil is run by, it's not depends only on the popularity of a leader, but also in the types of coalitions you can build in order to mobilize money, TV time, etc., etc. So, Fernando, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, I have to. Okay. So thank you, Paulo, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. It's a pleasure to share the table with you, with José Roberto, and virtually with Oscar Vilhena. Okay. Hello?
Yeah,
huh?
it's on.
Yeah, I put it very close. So, I will show some data in my presentation. It's a lot of graphs, and I ask you if anytime you feel it's confusing or if you need some clarification, you can interrupt me and ask whatever. Well, Yes, indeed. What Roberto told us was about the election process, what I call the second stage of the electoral process, the electoral campaign. That is the bright side of elections. I call it the bright side of elections because it's the more visible side of election. I want to talk exactly about coalitions. That's the hidden side of elections. It's the first stage. It occurs before the campaign starts, and I argue that it's as important as the second stage, that you can decide the election in this first stage. So I'm provoking here using this phrase that political parties try to win elections even before they start, and sometimes they do. It's never happened in the presidential elections, of course, but I will show some data about municipal elections and state regional elections. But before I start, I want to share with you some data. I think José Roberto told us about some of this data his presentation, but I want to show you some data about the Brazilian party system. So in the next election, Brazilian voters will elect one president, 27 governors, 27 senators, 513 federal legislators, and 1,059 state legislators. In total, we will have about 15,000 candidates. In the smallest states of Brazil, Roraima, voters will choose among 600 candidates. In the largest state of Brazil, São Paulo, voters will choose among 3,000 candidates. Those thousands of candidates, they are grouped into 32 political parties, as Roberto told us. And it makes Brazil one of the most fragmented party systems in the world. There is nothing that compares to Brazil. You can see in this graph that Brazil is a kind of outlier. Well, 21 parties are represented inside the lower house, the Brazilian lower house, or Câmara dos Deputados. We have 21 parties there. And if you have a look at the name of the label of the parties, you can see that labels don't help voters to differentiate among them. For example, you have the PT, the Workers' Party, on the left. You also have the PDT, the Democratic Labour Party, on the left. But you have the PTB, the Brazilian Labour Party, on the right, and you have many small parties, the nanicos, the nano parties, that have labor in their names. As well, you have many Republican parties in everywhere. So it's very confusing. Our party system is very complicated, very complex, it's very confusing. It leads some people to think that we have a chaotic party system, a chaotic, our politics will be characterized as chaotic. But I want to show you that it's not even true. Our politics is very stable, despite this huge number of parties, despite of this high fragmentation. Here in this graph, you have each one of these strips, these lines, one political party in the lower chamber. So the height of these strips, these lines, are the proportion of seats that this party has in the chamber, in the lower house. Here in the horizontal axis, we have years of election. So it starts in 1994, 1998, 2002, 2006, and goes up until 2010. What this graph shows is that the height of the strip is almost constant with time. It doesn't change a lot. It's constant, so it's stable. So since 1994, with this little spike in 1998, and up until today, the share of seats in the lower chamber in Brazil is almost equal. You can go to a bet house and bet that PT will have 14% of seats the next election, the PMDB will have 14% of seats in the next election, and you will won't lose your money. Yeah? And another interesting thing that this graph shows is that you have almost two ideological blocks in Brazil. I'm calling it ideological, but I'm not giving a substantive meaning to it. We can have a PT and then a PT. Let's stick to that. I think it's a good It's a good interpretation. I painted in reddish what we call the left parties, and I painted in bluish colors what you call the rightist parties. You can see that they split the votes inside the lower chamber. And they always split. When a party loses a vote, for example, you have this dark blue, the intermediary dark blue is the PFL. When the PFL loses votes, these votes goes to another party in the same ideological space. It's very interesting. It's very stable. And
because the people are the same.
And the people are the same. They move. They migrate. Exactly. And so combining, this stability combines with the huge concentration of votes and seats in few parties. For example, in the Brazilian Legislative Party, now in this legislative session that was elected in 2010, we have just 5 parties controlling more than 50% of the seats in the lower house. Just PT and PMDB, they together controls 1/3 of the votes in the lower house. So the system is very concentrated. This concentration is even higher in presidential elections. Here we have the votes for the PT and the PSDB since 1989. Since 1994, PT and PSDB, they together have more votes, more than 80% of the votes. With the only exceptions in 2002, when you have 2 other strong competitors that run that election and it makes the proportion of votes of PT and PSDB falls to around 70%. But they usually have more than 80% of votes. What is interesting in this table is that you never have the same party in the 3rd place. So every election we have this indication that voters want something new. It's true. In every election we have it. But we don't have this 3rd force. There is no such a thing like a 3rd party that's competitive that can challenge the polarity between PSDB and PT. And more than this polarity between PT and PSDB tends to be reproduced at the state level. If you take the 10 most populous states in Brazil, these states together concentrates more than 80% of voters. You can see that PSDB and PT are disputing the 1st or the 2nd place in 7 of them. In 2 of them, they are fighting hand-to-hand combat. They are fighting each other, PT versus PSDB. And another 3, they are fighting each other coalitions member, each other allies. So you have these 2 blocks competing also at the state level. It's like the PT and PSDB are given some structure to hold the Brazilian politics in all levels. And why is this? It occurs because parties are very consistent in the way they form coalitions. Left parties tend to form coalitions with the PT at the national level. Right parties tend to form coalitions with the PSDB at the national level. And at the state level, those parties tend to ally with each other. It's very rare to one party from one alliance ally in the state level with a party from another national alliance. So left parties ally with left parties at the state level, right parties ally with right parties at the state level. It makes the system much more simple. It's very easy to the voters now localize himself. Or he is pro-PT, or he is against PT, or he is a liberal, or he is conservative. It turns to be more like the United States than we suppose with such a number of parties. Voters are also very consistent. In spite of the fact that just 40% of voters declare to be identified with any one of our parties, if you take the way the voters choose their candidates 1 year, it's the same way they will choose the candidate the other year. For example, here, each one of these points represents a ballot station. It's aggregated vote, but it's the minimum aggregated vote that you can have. And we are not working here, I'm not working here with the individual information. I'm not asking the voter who he voted in 1994 and 1998, but I have the ballot station with just 400 voters. So I can approximate very much from this individual information. And here what it shows us that in ballot box where Lula gained the more votes in 1994 is also the same ballot station that he gains more votes in 1998. So you have a positive and a strong correlation between votes in each year for Lula. The same thing you have in 1998 to 2002. Suddenly in 2006, it appears that voters weren't consistent anymore. But if you disaggregate this data by states, you can see that in the south, southeast, and the central part of Brazil, the consistency is there. The relationship between vote in the PT in 2002 and the vote in PT in 2006 is very strong and very, it's positive and very strong. And those two regions in the two graphs above, they comprise about 60% of all the voters. So for 60% of Brazilian voters, almost 6% of Brazilian voters in 2006 were very consistent. And the same thing happened in 2010. Voters are very consistent in Brazil.
The ones that did not vote the same way.
All right. Who didn't vote for Lula the same way, they were in the northeast of Brazil, the northeast part of Brazil. What happened there? Everybody voted for Lula. Everybody. So what happened? Why you don't have this kind of curve there? Because the intercept is high. People who didn't vote for Lula in 2002 started to vote for Lula. What happened is that in this region, you just have 1/3 of voters. And of those 1/3 of voters, many of them already voted for Lula. So the impact of this voter is reduced. It's not that important. But when you plot it in a graph, it makes the graph seems like this. It's the problem of working with aggregated data. So voters are consistent temporarily between elections. And they are also consistent between levels of elections. For example, in São Paulo, people who voted for PSDB for governor also vote for PSDB for president. The correlation is about almost perfect. The same thing with the PT. So the question is, how can such a fragmented party system be so predictable and stable? With 32 parties, with being the highest fragmented party system in the world, how can we have a party system so stable, so predictable? Well, the answer is that because elections are happens in 2 stages. And what happened in the first stage, the dark side of elections? In the first stage, the parties coordinate. They're trying to coordinate between themselves. And they try to coordinate for what reason? They try to reduce the choices open to voters, to reduce the number of parties in a dispute. If this phase is successful, you just have 2 parties running into an election. And it almost always happens. Here we have the effective number of candidates. That's the candidates that are really competitive. We take out the nanicos from here. And you always have around 2. In the presidential election, we have some noise here. So we have some elections with with around 3 candidates, effective number of candidates. But you have almost always 2 candidates. In the gubernatorial elections, the mean is 2.5 candidates. But in almost all states, you have less than 2 candidates. In the municipal elections between 1990 and 2010, these 4 elections, almost always you have just 2 candidates. In a few cases, about 130 municipalities, you have just 1 candidate running. It's a perfect coordination. It's the dream of every police. And more than this, you have this amazing correlation between the size of the coalitions and the probability of being elected. If a party, if a candidate can form a coalition with more than 60% of voters, they are almost elected. This graph was made based on data from the municipal elections in 2012. And it shows clearly that, for example, if a coalition has 70% of the parties, all the parties that exist in that municipality, it will have about 70% of probability of being elected.
Can I ask about this? Is much more correlation than a causation? Because
Yes, I'm not talking about causation here. Yeah, yeah, it's a descriptor. You can talk. You can maybe it's a omitted variable behind it, the time of TV, something like that. I'm not claiming.
One of those be a vertical axis?
The vertical axis, the probability of being elected.
Right. I guess your slides has both of them being on the horizontal axis.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, it's on my.
No, a proportion. One is probability, the other is proportion.
Yeah. Yeah.
The probability is the proportion.
So, the probability of winning an election in Brazil increases if parties are successful in forming broad coalitions. Broad coalitions are rare. It don't happen all the time. It just happened in 1/3 of the municipalities in the 2012 elections. And it never occurred in the presidential elections. But what I'm trying to say here is that if a presidential candidate is able to form a broad coalition, he will win the election before it starts. It's my provocation, the start of the presentation. It can win the election before it starts. And what about the legislative election? The legislative election had the opposite effect. It increased the number of parties. Why? Because coalition have a small party bias. The small dots, the gray dots, are parties that are part of coalition. The black dots are parties that are not part of coalitions. You can see that the gray dots are also above the diagonal line. It means that they receive more seats in the Congress than the proportion of votes. And the dot lines means that they being below the diagonal line means that these parties have received less seats than their share of votes. So the coalitions generate advantage to small parties and make the small parties abundant. So in a sense, what happens in the legislative elections feeds the executive elections. You only can have a strategy of forming a broad coalition and trying to win the election before the election starts if you have many parties. It gives a logic to the Brazilian party system. It gives some order to the Brazilian party system. And we are not in chaos anymore, but we are we also are not in the stagnated end of this dichotomy. So we know a lot about how, why we have many parties or small number of parties, and it depends on preferences and electoral rules. We know that a lot in political science, but we don't know much about why some candidates are successful in forming broad coalitions, and others are not successful in forming broad coalitions. And one factor that we know that has some effect is the power of the party leadership over the party. So I will jump this slide. I will give an example of how this first stage of elections works. It's happening right now in Brazil. In Brazil, the PMDB and the PT are living a crisis, as Paulo told us. And why this crisis is about? It's about some positions in some ministers and everything, but I think the principal issue is the support of the PT to some PMDB candidates in some states in Brazil. One example is Maranhão. Maranhão is dominated by the Sarney family. That is a strong ally of the federal government. But the PT in Maranhão decided to they elected a president that was against the alliance of the PT with the Sarney family. And what the PT did? The National Committee of the PT decided to remove the president elected by this regional branch of the PT. They went there and they take it out. And they indicate a new president that was more aligned with the Sarney family. So more in accord with the national strategy. So it's more or less this what I have to say. It's okay. Conclusion is that elections occur in two stages. It's it's the message that I want to pass. And the first stage is as important as the second. Pre-electoral coordination gives order to what appears to be chaos. Pre-electoral coordination makes the political system more stable and predictable. And we should pay more attention to political parties' internal politics, because they are important key to understand this pre-electoral process. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Fernando. We waited for a half hour to establish the connection to São Paulo, and then we lost it. So, Oscar Vilhena will not be joining us. I apologize to everybody. I apologize to him and to the people at GSV, but Fundação Getulio Vargas. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things here about this. It's a very stable scenario. Seems to be pretty boring, except that, as someone said recently in a conference I was at the Lemon Foundation in Illinois, at the University of Illinois, Brazil always does what you least expect. We had in June of last year, as you all remember, this eruption of protests all over Brazil. You cannot find a single reference to this in Brazilian media before. There is no political analyst in Brazil that has predicted that. Journalists didn't predict this. The government was not expecting it. The opposition were not expecting it. The members of the political parties were not expecting it, and the protesters themselves were not expecting it. Actually, the funny thing was someone apparently at Palácio do Planalto who said at some point, the third or fourth day, assim, que bicho é esse? What is this new political animal that is loose in the streets of Brazil? They didn't understand it. I think we are still trying to come to terms to that. We know that the protests started, they mushroomed, they were held in more than 600 cities in Brazil. They were mobilized by social media, through social media, when political parties started, one specifically, when the PT started to get involved in the protest, they were rebuffed by the protesters. So it signals something that we also know from statistics, that people are disgusted with the political system, with political parties. We know that for a fact. With this very stability, in this very well-functioning system. It functions, it works. It produces exactly the desired outcome. 80%, I believe, of the bills proposed by the president or the government are approved in Congress in Brazil. It's very functional. So this movement, this mass movement, it started to fade away, I believe, the moment it turned violent. You heard about the black blocs, which were groups of, they may be described as anarchists or as fascists, as pick your term, and they were there. The origin of those groups is not very clear, what they represent. We know that they are masked and they have very clear objectives. I think they particularly like bank branches. To destroy them, I think, as a symbol of something, of capitalism, but they produce a type of violence that is very demobilizing in Brazil. And so predictions that were made, including by one potential vice presidential candidate, Marina Silva, that the protests will return, well, maybe not. Now, the second impact I read something that Maria Cristina Fernandes, political editor of Valor Econômico, was here recently, and then she wrote a piece 2 weeks ago, very interesting, about the fact that the protests had a demobilizing, and I wanted to listen to both Toledo and Fernando about this, a demobilizing impact on the electorate in Brazil. That people are just fed up with political system, with politicians, and there is this theory that because of, and I think Toledo has some very interesting information on this, sort of to the contrary, but the idea in this article by Maria Cristina was that it based on some interesting studies by some consulting firms there or polling firms, is that in this upcoming election, because of people are less motivated, because they're disgusted with political parties and they don't find an alternative, they are going to spoil their vote. They are going to the nulo or brancos, etc. And this is important because if the proportion of those votes increase, the proportion of valid votes is reduced, making it more likely for a resolution in the first round. This, according to this analysis, is what helped President Fernando Henrique Cardoso be elected in the his first and second elections in the first round. And he was the only one to have achieved that since the adoption of the system. The other thing that relates to social media is an article that just appeared. I analyzed a little bit of the protests in an article that appeared in a journal, Georgetown University, and it's available there if you're interested. This week's Newsweek has another twist on this social media business, saying that this time, I don't know if you read this, it's called Winning Hearts and Likes. Very interesting, suggesting that this time social media will have an impact and it will could somewhat compete with television appearances. It'd be another new factor in determining how people vote. And all candidates are betting on this very much. Everybody has 1, 2, 10 Twitter accounts and are in all kinds of social media, all candidates. And it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, Campos is starting to show that he's more organized in this than the other, etc. Well, but we are still early, but all of those candidates are there. So I wanted very much to hear from you about this. And the third thing, and here we can enlarge the conversation because it's there is a sense in Brazil, part of the protest I think was, and that's what I write here, provoked or caused by a great sense of anxiety in Brazil about the direction of the Brazilian economy. We know that the people in the lower income levels in Brazil have never lived as well as they do today, average, in the aggregate. Brazil at that level has been growing at 6-7% a year, Chinese types of growth. There has been this poverty reduction in Brazil. People felt hopeful, but according to some analysis I read and some observations in Brazil, is that people feel anxious about the continuity, the sustainability of this. We know it's current debate in Brazil that people have concluded this model of growth is not sustainable anymore. We are going to have, in order to continue to create jobs and to sustain this, we are going to start to, improve the quality of the economy, improve productivity. This is a debate that is all over Brazilian media, and it's a very important debate. And it's interesting because you two barely, and especially you barely touched on the economy, which I think everybody in Brazil assumes that the economy is not going well. It is maybe that there are contradictory signs, industrial productivity very high, the latest indications, but other indications very negative. The government has apparently decided that now, and this is in the papers today, that Brazil is going to boom again, and that's the official line. Doesn't look very probable, but that's the statement, including by the president. So I wanted to, start the conversation by asking the two of you first about this business of protests, social media. Is the Economist, for instance, who wrote about the impact of social media in mobilization of voters, are they exaggerating a bit? Are experts expecting this in Brazil? And then in the economy, is this stable also? Things are maybe deteriorating, but not very fast, and not in any way that will alter this very stable scenario. So, Toledo, why don't you start?
Thank you. Well, I believe in Paul Krugman. And he is in Brazil today, and he said that Brazil is not as vulnerable as the Federal Reserve has said 2 weeks ago. And it's true, because the index that the Federal Reserve produced is completely bullshit. They compare things that are not comparable, and I think it didn't help at all the Brazilian-U.S. relation. And there's a very big problem concerning the economy, I think. That is the indicators that the media and the business community uses to define if the economy is well are very different from those who the regular folk and the voters use to define how is the economy going. So we tend to use the GDP and things like that to define, well, it's a bad economy. And the regular folk tends to use the employment data and not exactly the employment data. They know if they have jobs or not. They don't need to see in the paper. And if their money is going through the end of the month or it's short. And I strongly believe that there is no indication that the popular economic data, let's call it that, it's showing that this regular folk is going to change their views. For me, the best economic indicator in Brazil is consumer confidence index, that's used created by Ibope and used by Confederação Nacional da Industry National Confederation. And it correlates almost perfectly with the popularity of the president, since Fernando Henrique, through Lula, through Dilma. And it doesn't show at all that it's going down. In fact, it shows it's going up. So that's why I didn't mention the economy, because I think the perception that the media has about the economy is completely wrong in the point of, it probably is right in some kind of way if you look forward. We are still having problems, and those problems are going to be deeper and deeper. But concerning the election, I don't see it happen now. Probably it's not a good election to win, because the 2015 is not going to be beautiful. And if I was Dilma, probably I like to stop here and let the other guy deal with it. But I don't think it's going to be the main issue now. But it's always, something happens like Brazilian debt, something, coming from the skies.
Maria Clara will explain that.
Yeah. Well, so concerning the blank votes and the spoiled votes, this is a classic. Every election, we hear the same thing. No, Brazilians are disgusted about the democracy, about the political party system, And each election, less and less people come to vote. Look at this data about the presence in the ballots. They were 15% now of absence. Now there are 20%. There's just one problem. Those people died, but they are still in
the rosters.
Exactly. So we have the proof now, because the electoral justice in Brazil has cleaning the lists of voters in 2 states, Alagoas and Sergipe, which states that cannot be accused to be exactly developed. And the difference is less than half of the people who hadn't appeared to vote. Let's say it's easier to explain that way. It was 25% of absence, and the last election was 8%. So the difference.
Because they cleaned up, they removed the ones that
the ghosts
that died from the roster.
No more ghosts.
Here they vote. People in the cemeteries vote very heavily.
Well, I don't want to compare, but in Ukraine, in Crimea also, it appears. So
Crimea, 120% of the electorate voted in one place. It's very efficient.
So now we're going to have digital recognition in the ballot. So I really don't believe that Brazilians are not believing anymore in democracy, in the electoral process. I think this is a good thing to talk about it, but it's not really true. Concerning the social media, it has played a very huge role in 2010 and in 2012, much more than we noticed at the time. Parties had armies, true armies of people just posting things in Facebook, in blogs, in internet, all over the internet, in Twitter. There was so true that this year a new bill was approved by Congress prohibiting parties to pay people to write on the internet. So this is going to have some impact on the election.
Say that again.
You can't pay someone to write against your...
Oh, to attack.
Yeah, exactly. In theoretically, of course, this is one. The law is one thing, the reality is another. So it already has a very big impact, but I won't compare it to television, because television is on 100% of Brazilian houses. The internet is on 50%. Of course, those 50% are more theoretically more important than the other half, because they can propagate the ideas. Mauricio can explain this better than me. But the television still is the main channel to communicate with the voters, I believe.
Fernando.
Okay, I think that the stability of the system is very hard to break. The way it is configured today, not only by the merits of the government that makes Dilma with such a approval rating, but also because of the fails on the opposition side is bigger. The fails are bigger than the fails at the government side. So I think the position of Dilma is very, very secure. But we can have some exogenous impacts on this equilibrium, and we can have also endogenous effects on this equilibrium. The economy, I agree totally with José Roberto. He knows much better than I. I think it won't be capable of displacing this equilibrium. The shock would have to be very, very big to displace this equilibrium, to Dilma lose the elections. We have to have a huge crisis to happen it, like what happened with Fernando Henrique. So I don't believe in any exogenous factor affecting this election. But I think that some endogenous factors can destabilize this election. Because I think the origins of the protest is linked to this instability. As Paulo said, people are disgusted with this political system. There is not a lot of people, but some people are disgusted with these political systems. In order to have a functioning, a working democracy, you have to have people that believe in that democracy. You have to have alternation in power. Okay, 8 years of a party in power is not a long time to be in power, but if people are anxious, if people are not very patient, this can be a factor of demobilization, a factor of disbelief in the democratic system. When the status began in June, we have one kind of protesters going to the street. They are linked to the far left parties, PSTU, PCO, and other the more left than this. Yes, far left parties. And these parties are those that never will be in power. They never will be in power. So the only way they have to propagate their ideas is protesting. It's the way they do. They always did that. The surprise is that in the middle of June, suddenly, thousands and thousands and thousands of people joined them. Joined them because they were very, the repression was brutal against them. But they also, I think, they also embraced the idea that the democracy in Brazil don't give them a voice. So they opted to exit the democracy. It's what motivated many people there. So they are trying. They were trying to find a way to participate in the process away from the regular channels of participation, away from political parties.
You said that you don't see external factors interfering with the results of the election, but you do see how internal factors could. Does that internal factor have a name and a last name?
All right, sorry. Yes, I'm going there. Yes, I think the question of the coalitions is a huge factor to impact in these elections. This fight between PMDB and PT, and I think José Roberto wrote about it the last week. It's very interesting because the PMDB are losing power, and they are afraid of the PT gain power. So every time someone gains in politics, someone loses, and when you are allies, if your ally gains, you lose the election. So I think maybe the PMDB is trying to figure out how to escape this trap, how to maintain the power in the states and municipalities and everything like that. I don't know if they will run away from the alliance with the PT. I believe they will still in the alliance because they don't have a viable alternative. But maybe some members of the PMDB, what always happens, will support other candidates.
Yeah, Brazil is a country of co-option, right?
Yeah.
Politics by co-option always. People want to support the government in Brazil. We are one of the most governist countries ever. Mauricio.
Oh, I have two questions for both. For José Roberto, how do you see the fact that for the first time we're not going to have a candidate from São Paulo in the election running, given that, for example, the state of Minas is kind of the Ohio of Brazil, and no president was elected without winning Minas, and for the first time there is going to be a battle there, and also in São Paulo. Another question, I fully believe that the presidential election is about the economy. How do you see the inflation playing a role on that? Because if people are employed but the salary is not falling, the cost of living anywhere in Brazil? That's my question. And for the professor, first of all, I appreciate your effort to see what's right, left in Brazil. I still been trying to figure out what's right and left, so But don't you think that the coalition is kind of endogenous? Because what I see is that, first of all, election and re-election is based on the evaluation of the government. If the government is doing well, it's very likely that they're going to get parties with them, that they're going to form the coalition. So it's kind of they're buying the probability of power, and it's clear. So how do you treat evaluation of government and the incumbent? Because some people claim that Brazil, with the re-election system, has a recall process after 4 years, just a recall. If you're going to go forward on that, and my last question would be. I have a survey that says that 70% of the people are open to vote in a party different from the PT and PSDB for the presidential election. Do you see that there is a space for a third force really on this year election to go into a second round and give a lot of hard time for the president?
Let me complement the question. When Marina announced, when there was this announcement of this alliance between Marina, there was a sort of there was movement. Yeah, and then it went down. Now, is this already, as they say, in the price? It's already has been processed, discounted, or if Marina, if they make this official, this alliance, there could be movement again, or this is a done deal and Marina will enter history as a blip. For both of you.
Começa dessa vez aí que a tua pergunta é mais difícil.
Yeah. About the ideology, you know, I don't give any meaning for this, right? But they, not only parties, they put themselves in different space when we ask them by surveys and everything, or you take the votes at the legislative and you separate them by factors, and you can see that they are distinct in some space. And voters also, they distinguish parties. Voters are very inconsistent in the way they classify themselves right, left. They don't know nothing about it, but they know that PT is one side and PSDB is another side, for example. So I don't have any clue what's the meaning of this ideological space, but there is a space, and the parties differentiate in it. So, but about coalitions. I think, yes, coalitions is endogenous, is what she asked me, the endogenous factor, and I think coalition is endogenous factor, and is the most important one of the endogenous factors. I think the PMDB won't leave the candidacy of Dilma, the alliance of the PT, because of the good evaluation. And because the evaluation is not that good, this was some months ago, it falls with the protests, and it's around I think the optimal and good, the very good and good are around 36%, and the regular is about 40%, something like that. So it's the same of Lula in 2006, I believe. So it's not huge, but it's enough to make the PMDB think twice in going out, leaving the coalition. But I think it could happen the same thing that happened with Serra in 2002, when the PSDB decided to fight the PFL, and the PFL leave the coalition. What happened in that occasion? The members of the PFL in the south and southeast, they still with the PSDB, but at the northeast, they went out. So maybe we have the same thing now. For example, the Rio de Janeiro. Cabral said that they will support but nobody is believing he will support Dilma. It's very hard. I don't think.
Nobody believes that the PMDB
in Rio will support the Dilma candidacy. They are saying that they will support. They will be. I don't believe, and I believe that PT will have a strong candidate in Rio de Janeiro.
Okay.
Lindeberg. So the fight there is very, very, very strong, and I think that they will lose the support of MDB, and it will happen in many other places. Okay. It can be a negative effect. Well, about the, I have to put my glasses. I'm old now. Okay, the space for the third force. Right. I think every election will have this feeling that there is a space for a third force. And I think always in service, people, I want to vote for another party. People in Brazil, voters, don't have a good impression of political parties. I think nowhere in the world people have a good impression of political parties. But in Brazil, the party identity is very, very low. The identity with PT, that's the strong identity, is about 20%. So it's not a big number. So people don't like political
In the
parties.
identity, only 20% of those who vote for the PT are strongly connected to it. Is that how do you measure it?
The question varies, but you have a question like, do you like some parties of these parties? Okay, I like PD and represent
Okay.
the thing.
All right.
So it's the number is very low. The people who identifies with parties. So it's I don't think it's I think it's natural. Somebody I want to vote for other parties. I don't like this kind of parties. It's just to finish, but the third force. So every time people say that comes the third force, but if you take a look at the votes of Marina Silva in the last election, she was well voted in some states of the South.
South.
So, and she still votes from the Serra, from the PSDB. And if you go back to the election where Ciro Gomes and Garotinho participated, they were very concentrated in their states. So what I think will happen the next election with the PSDB of Eduardo Campos and Marina. Marina will go very well in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and some other states, but I think just São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And Eduardo Campos will be very well in Pernambuco. The rest will be, and the other states will be the same.
On Marina, do you think?
She's in the price, I think. Maybe if she appears during the campaign in TV, she can add some, it's not in the pejorative sense, but the tree huggers and some people with their religious beliefs to Eduardo Campos. But maybe it's the difference between him and Aécio to be in the second place. Maybe. I don't know. It's a possibility. Concerning the inflation, don't get me wrong. Of course, it's the economy, and I'm the stupid. And but I don't see the inflation now taking the place of it has in 1944, when Fernando Henrique was elected in the first time. What we see now is more like, it's not exactly inflation. Of course, there is inflation, but the real political problem is when something gets in a higher price, as tomato last year. And with the dry season, you probably will have some problems with food prices. Exactly. So, but it fluctuates. So it goes high today and tomorrow it will go down. So it's difficult to predict what will happen. And concerning the geographical problem, well, São Paulo is going to be, for the first time, many years, an interesting election, because I think we're going to have a second round in São Paulo, because I think PSDB will have problems to retain power over there. Not necessarily PT will profit from it. I think PMDB has a chance over there. And but I really think this, of course, it will have some kind of impact on the presidential election, but I think the geographic thing in the election is different. It's more like big cities against small cities. The biggest gap you see in all surveys are between those who live in the countryside against those who live in the metropolitan areas. In metropolitan areas, the popularity of Dilma is much lower. The support, the votes are very much lower than in the countryside. And she did a policy to reinforce the difference. She has distributed some kind of 10,000 machines to mayors to build roads. She has given almost 100 interviews just to small radio stations in the countryside. So she much well known in the countryside than in major cities. And we journalists tend to see just where we live. And there's an imbalance in this perception because we are not seeing what's happening in the countryside. And in the countryside, the government has a very stronger position.
Maria Clara? English. Switch.
Sorry, I have to speak in English. With this, 50 years of dictatorship in Brazil, that's going to be, I don't like to use this word, but celebrated or commemorated.
Oh,
Remembered, yeah. It's astonishing how, for me at least, the movement that has, outcome those days in the right wing, very right position of people that are including thinking about going to the streets, I think next weekend. March, just to try to revive the march that took place before 31st of March, 1964. What I'd like to ask is this: this right movement that is coming, that's appearing now, something that was a little bit hidden. Will it have some impact on the elections? Because of course it's in the other side of it's in the other extreme position. Comparing to PT. Is it possible for it to reinforce the situation of the other candidates vis-a-vis Dilma? Will it have any sort of impact in the elections or not at all?
The march that Maria Clara is mentioning was called the March of the Family with God for Freedom. It was in São Paulo. Yes. It was a very important event before that created the environment for the coup.
There's a very interesting demographic data that is just 2 out of 10 Brazilians were born before 1964. And if you...
Two out of 10 Brazilians living today were born.
Exactly, living today. And if you think about those who could understand what was happening at that time, it will be 1 out of 10. So 90% of Brazilians, for them, the coup was history, literally. So I was thinking about it and trying to write something about it, and it makes me a little worried because for 75% of Brazilians, exactly those who has been born after 1607, never had any kind of problem to vote, for example, because of the dictatorship. Because when they become 18 years old, the democracy was already in place. So, for example, Eduardo Paes, the mayor of Rio de Janeiro, never had any kind of problem with this sort of problem. He never had any risk to be taken by the police or any kind of real consequence personally to him because of the dictatorship. So what I mean is, for 3 out of 4 Brazilians, democracy is given. It's like the refrigerator. It was already there when they born. And I think because of this, maybe, I don't know, but maybe they will see the democracy process and the elections like something that's not so holy as those who fought to have this. And this could legitimate something as has happened in the Arab Spring, where public manifestations or protests have more legitimacy than an election. And this could be a really big problem. I don't know if immediately, but maybe in the long run. This is one thing. About the rights and the people who are living in the past or trying to revive the dictatorship, I really don't believe this is a strong movement, and that they will have. It's very, very particular. You can count on your two hands those congressmen, for example, who expressed this point of view, like Bolsonaro, and they have a much bigger importance in the news media than they have in the political live in Brazil.
Just to go here and there. Just before, one thing that I heard also, I think was an observation by Fernando Henrique Cardoso here at the Wilson Center. Someone asked about this business of so that maybe the support for democracy along the side, maybe people are not as paying attention to this, how important this is. And his answer was something along the lines, this is something, democracy now is as natural as breathing, but try to take it away from people. And people will mobilize because it's a given now, but don't take it away because I think people will value it. Sorry, let's go here, and there. Yes.
I'm saying this as more as an outsider because I'm American.
Mm-hmm.
So as a young American voter, when I see political infighting in my system, it turns me away, and I don't want to get involved with it. And we read the articles, we see social media as an aspect, but I feel social media is a bit overrated. I feel younger Americans take more political news from shows like The Daily Show and The Colbert Report. So,
very good.
So is there any kind of movement like that to satire politics in Brazil? And also, how are the young voters in Brazil? Because I feel 32 political parties, that's a lot. And just having two parties here, it just creates so much anger and tension. So,
okay. Now, do you like to try this? Young. One thing that I wrote actually in this piece, one of the most beneficial aspects of the protests, and I didn't create this, I read it somewhere, was I think one of the good thinkers in Brazil in the media is Alberto Dines, who I wrote this somewhere saying, what the protest did was to motivate a new generation of people to get into politics. And that was the positive aspect of the protest. And people, until it turned violent, people were there. I remember in the first week when people in government started saying, careful because the image of the country is being tarnished. And immediately you could see signs. And the New York Times has a site with all those signs saying, people saying, we apologize for the inconvenience while we improve the country. It was the idea was precisely the young people bringing more energy to the process. It was very positive in this sense. But do you have anything to say about the younger people's attitude towards politics in Brazil? Is there any evidence, any statistics? Maurício may.
Just one thing to add for his question. One of the challenges of the social media is the adverse selection. Always the same people go to the adverse selection of the candidates. They're always getting the same people when they're in their Facebook pages.
and they claim that the Twitter, only the journalists are following their Twitter. So the key question is how to attract those young voters to participate, to engage, not only the same followers all the time.
Do you want to say something? Because we have
Just few words about it.
we have
I
there.
don't
and
know
we have
about this nowadays generation of young people. The people today, I don't think they. I think they still attached to some traditional media, and we have reports that people relies on people they know, the family or friends to decide whom to vote. But I think the new generation, this is children, the people that are children now, small children, they will be completely different. I think we'll have to figure out now how these people will behave in a democracy, how they will choose their candidates, how they will want to participate and everything.
Yeah, and Brazil has this interesting feature that you have the 16-year-olds that are allowed to vote. If they're not mandated as the 18 to 70, but they are allowed. So if they are motivated, they could have some impact. Yes, please go ahead. And then we come here and we go there.
Okay, Rafael Alejandro Jara from the Organization of American States. Obrigado very much for the presentation. That's the limit of my Portuguese. Looking at the potential popularity for Eduardo Campos and Marina Silva, at least on Twitter, I'm just curious as to whether the panelists see that there might be a response, any changes in policy, especially regarding environmental, indigenous, or foreign policy issues.
If they were elected?
No, if they bring the subjects to the table.
Oh.
Changes by Dilma, as you seem to agree that she will win.
Now, Dilma is changing something yesterday and today. Until 10 days ago, there was, you know that there was a rupture in Brazil-U.S. relations because of the spying scandal, the spying thing, allegations, etc. And until very recently, people were saying, well, we are stuck. How do we get out of this? And the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself in Brazil was saying it's not at my level, at the level of Susan Rice, that we are going to improve the relations between Brazil and the U.S., which is a quite interesting statement. Well, apparently it is at that level, because yesterday the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States visited Brazil, was very well received, and the Minister of Finance in Brazil, not the Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that we have to go for a rapprochement with the United States. Well, 6 months ago, we were all about to fall in love, from all indications. And then there was this event, and there was the rupture, and it became paralyzed. Apparently, it's unparalyzed. It's in the process of being unparalyzed. The other thing that I think there may be some political calculation behind this, because the business community in Brazil, which is an important voice, is saying that it cannot live with this sort of ruptured relationship with the United States. It doesn't work. And I believe a country that is worried about the rating, the credit rating by the rating agencies in New York, probably calculates that a better relationship, or the appearance of a better relationship with the United States, helps keep the ratings, or so to protect. The other thing, and here it comes from you directly, and I'm quoting, yesterday he helped me teach a class at GW, and he was talking about Venezuela. Not only Jack Lew was in Brasilia yesterday and today, Roberta Jacobson, the Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, is in Brasilia. Obviously, Venezuela has to be at the top of the conversation. And there is an anxiety about what Brazil's intentions is. Brazil traditionally is for stability in its neighbor. That's the default position in Brazil. Now, yesterday we were talking about this to the class I teach there at GW, and Toledo came with a very interesting idea about, because Brazil was initially hesitant about talking about protests in Venezuela. because the PT has some sympathy towards Maduro or Chavez, etc. But what is the story about protests that could not be helpful in Brazil? You have to have apparently, the government may be feeling some pressures to have a position on protests for reasons that have little to do with Venezuela.
Yeah, because if you are against the protests over there, you are against the protests over here, and the other way around. So if you support the protests here, you must support the protests there. And I think the Brazilian government is locked in a difficult position because of the support they gave to Chavez, and now they are having a very big trouble to adjust this narrative to the Maduro government that is, as I said before earlier today, much more green than his name should suppose. And, I think they are they don't know what to do. I just want to say something about what Mauricio has said. It's very interesting, this thing about the social media, because there's a guy in Brazil who has made very interesting research about this, and what it shows is that everybody who thinks one way politically talks to themselves, and the others who thinks the opposite talk to themselves also, and they never ever get together unless you have a press and you have someone fortunately from some journalist that could be quoted from one side or the other, according, of course, to their interests at that time. So it's more like you use to mobilize those who are already in favor of you, but you are not. It's not a good way to get someone new.
Yes.
Compared to what we have been discussing, maybe my question is anecdotal, but I can't stop asking. Is Mensalão dead in terms of this impact in this election?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Why? Because it had no impact in 2006 and afterward. So I don't believe it will be some impact in this election, unless you have the Joaquim Barbosa candidacy. It can, but it's very small effect. Not not capable of take votes.
Yeah, the Joaquim Barbosa candidacy is not a national candidacy. Would be just a device to mobilize some part of the electorate if he would run for the Senate, for instance, in Rio. And this is what apparently Campos was working on, because he is a highly, that's what it's a pity that Vilhena could not be with us, because he comments on this. He finds it very negative what happened institutionally in the Mensalão, especially this last phase, where it politicized the court. But it is the fact that there is, I think, still this idea, given what's his name, Joaquim Barbosa's popularity, attraction, that a candidacy, if he is a candidate somewhere, he can follow a national candidate in other places, that you would have some sort of impact. Okay. Well, let's go there and here. And no, you want to say something?
And just to say that it already had an impact, because those who are anti-PT or had this, if they have any kind of doubt, now they don't have anymore, so they are really against it. But the other effect was that most voters are now thinking, well, politicians, they're all the same.
Yeah, because there is the other version of the Mensalão in Minas Gerais, yes.
José Roberto, you mentioned that health is going to be a major issue in this year's election. Besides the Mais Médicos issue and the Cuban doctors, what is the primary issue that you see from a public health perspective?
Because every survey shows that health care is the biggest Brazilian problem. If the Brazilians are asked are the biggest problem in Brazil, 30% will say the healthcare system. And so this has been always a very big issue in every election since probably the last 10 or 15 years. But this year, exactly because the federal government has had this approach to mais médicos, more doctors, this will be an issue because this has divided the society. Those from upper class and middle upper class are in general against it because you are importing semi-slave doctors from Cuba, and 80% of the population are in favor because now they have doctors that they didn't. So it's going to be an issue because the government would like to be an issue because it's good for them.
And the candidate, the PT candidate for the governorship of São Paulo is the most recent
and odd enough,
Minister of Health.
São Paulo is the state, the richer state in Brazil, and is also the state who had required more doctors.
That's well, last two questions here and there. Good.
Very quick question. James Zito Adler from the Cambridge Institute for Brazilian Studies. I was very impressed that you started off with something of a comparative perspective between the United States and Brazil. And thinking about your graphs, I think we have 32 parties, but we only have 2 labels. And you seem to be making the argument that you have 2 parties with 32 labels. So the serious question is, are there any swing voters? Are there any people that are convincible at the margin when you have this fairly balanced opposition? Because the research in the United States was to identify the 100,000 people that might change their mind and to not waste your efforts, spend money on the candidates that have already made up their mind and are not going to change.
Mauricio makes a living of that.
Yes, I'm sure he...
The micro
analysis of the data. And the last question is, on your list of issues, I mean, my vote is for education as an issue, and I didn't hear that come up a single time.
I can ask two. They're similar. I think it's a bit similar. Assuming that the 3 will be confirmed as candidates in the election, what will be the main differences in their platform, in their proposals, issues for the new government? Because we haven't talked about, well, we talked about the issues but not what their differences might be.
And on education, right? Because they are all, equally bad, right? No, because it's amazing. No, in São Paulo, for instance, that has probably the best education institutions in Brazil, is not the
It's the seventh state in educational index.
Yeah. But education in general is part of the discussion in municipal elections.
Right. Okay.
And maybe state elections, because they are responsible for the elementary schools and the middle schools and high schools. But you have the Ministry of Education in Brazil had implemented very interesting programs. So they have this ProUni and things like that. I don't think it will have some impact, but I think that the issue, education, it will appear because it's a very positive, everybody wants to talk about education. Education is very important, education is the most important thing. I think every candidate will repeat that. Yes, without much difference. But what will be the difference between them? I think you have the traditional campaign. The government will defend the programs. They will show the programs exhaustively, and the opposition will try to show that there is another way to make the same things. And you have this third candidate that you try to say, hey, I'm the new, and I don't know what she has to show, or what he has to show, but he'll try to show that he's the new. So I think we don't have many programmatic difference. Everybody will be in favor of both of them. Everybody will be in favor of education and health and everything.
Exactly that. There's no difference. That's the main problem of the position. They can't have, they still don't have something that differentiates them from the government because, you know, we are different, but how? Well, we defend the same things, but we are better.
Yeah, we can do I think there was one thing that may be the question of the size of the state. We have, I think, what symbolizes the alliance on the right is the impostometro. I don't know if you know about it. It's a clock that measures the amount of money that goes to the government in taxes. So I think it symbolizes a lot of the right, how the right thinks in Brazil. And in the opposite side, you have the solidarity, that the idea that people have to share what they can. And I think it can make, but it's a very sophisticated. I think it for the general public, they won't be different.
Maurice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask one final question. Debates. Doesn't Dilma need to debate? Because remember, Fernando Henrique never did.
She will.
Needs to?
No, she needs, because if she doesn't, TV Global will be against her, so she need to. So she will debate, but probably just two.
One debate, two debates?
One in Global, certain. There's no doubt about it. Probably one in TV Bandeirantes, Band, because it's traditionally the first debate, the start of the campaign, and they are analyzing if they will do a third debate. I, of course, need them to believe that there will be four, because I work for the fourth TV station, so and the fifth that will be YouTube. So we need them to make five.
But you don't think that this, you don't seem to believe that this will have any particular impact?
Never had. In Brazilian history, there is a very interesting case that, well, Fernando Henrique lost an election because of a debate in 85. Yeah, but that was kind of different because it was more the addition of the debate than the debate itself. And but since then, it hadn't had practically no impact. Just one exception in the Brasilia DC, let's say, election. Once the Cristóvão Buarque had a better performance during the debate against Joaquim Rodrigues that everybody voted for Joaquim Rodrigues because, well, it was for him.
Oh, yeah, humiliated the poor man. Well, with that, thank you very much, José Roberto. Thank you very much, Fernando. Apologies, and we'll keep doing this, and with the certainty, obvious, that the quality of political campaign will be very, very high, as it usually is in the market.
Mas não votaram no Lula.
Eu não tenho, eu vou te mandar um e-mail.
Pena, quando o Collor humilhou ele com a relação do...
Achei muito bacanas os gráficos, eu nunca tinha pensado em colocar...
Não é que funciona sempre.